never rich, they were never famous, but they were happy. They were happy because they were able to buy a home in a safe and stable neighborhood. They were able to raise a family in a strong and stable home. They were able to retire with dignity and security. And what really made them happy is they were able to leave all 4 of their children better off than themselves. And the reason why I say this to you is because that's not just my story, that's our story. It defines this country. It makes us different from the rest of the world. And almost every other nation on earth throughout history, what you achieved in life is largely determined by what your parents did before you. If you came from a rich family or a politically connected family or a family that had power, you got to achieve and get ahead. And everybody else was stuck being whatever it is their parents were before them. What's made us different is that upward mobility, the chance to be able to fulfill your God-given potential. That is what makes us special. And so, quite frankly, it should trouble us that after 6.5 years of Barack Obama, but in fairness, it began before, a growing number of Americans doubt whether that's still possible for them. Why do they doubt it? Because life is harder. Everything costs more. And we're not making as much as we once did in comparison. The jobs that once sustained us are gone to another country or replaced by a machine. The ones that are left don't pay what they used to pay, certainly in comparison to what things cost these days. So it's not rare to run into someone who 20 years ago in the same job with a comparable paycheck were able to save money. And now they live paycheck to paycheck. It's also not rare to run into young Americans who did everything they were told they needed to do. They went to college, they got a degree, they graduated, but they owe a bunch of money in student loans and they can't find a job. Why is this happening? Well, part of it is a downturn. We had an economic downturn and it was bad, but we've had economic downturns before and we've climbed out of it. Here's what's happening. The world is changing dramatically. This is not just an economic downturn, it is an economic transformation. This economy is fundamentally different than the one I grew up in. Fundamentally different than the one we had even 10 years ago. And there are a lot of ways to describe it, but I use some real-world examples. You know, one of the largest retailers on the planet is Amazon. They do not own a single store. One of the largest transportation companies in America is Uber. They do not own a single car. One of the largest hospitality companies is Airbnb. It's a room-sharing business. They don't own a single hotel room. That's how different this economy is from what we had 5, 7 years ago, not to mention 15 or 20. And it's not just that the economy is changing, it's changing faster than ever. One of my favorite statistics. It took 75 years for the telephone to reach 100 million users. It took Candy Crush 1. That's just a game. So the world is changing, and it's changing faster than ever. And what it means for us is our policies have to keep pace. We have to have policies that make us competitive in the world. We have to have policies that give our people 21st century skills, and we have to have policies that keep us safe in a world that grows more dangerous. And today we're doing none of those 3 things. For starters, we have tax policies, regulatory policies, a national debt, a healthcare law, and even energy environmental policies that make us uncompetitive. Now, it was never a good idea to have high taxes and a lot of regulations, but in the 21st century, it's a disaster. A disaster. Because we live in a global economy. We have to compete with dozens of countries now for the best jobs, the best companies, the best ideas. And increasingly, we're losing that competition. Why are we losing it? Our government's fault. You can't compete in the global economy with the highest combined corporate tax rate in the world. You can't compete in the global economy when you're the only G8 country. Of the 8 largest economies, we are the only one that tells our businesses, if you make a bunch of money abroad and try to bring it back, we're going to tax you on it twice. You can't compete when you've got regulations that make it impossible to start a business. That's why for the first time in 35 years, we have more businesses dying than starting. But we can turn this around. We can turn this around with a tax code that makes a flat 25% tax rate for all businesses, big and small. That would make us globally competitive again. We can start by having a territorial system of taxation, which means if you're an American company that made money in another country, we want you to bring that money back here to America to create jobs here in this country. And the way we're going to do it is not double taxing you. We can start by having a tax code that allows you to immediately expense what you invest back in your business. Let me tell you what that means in the real world. It means the more people you hire and the more you pay them, the less you will owe the IRS. In essence, having a tax code not just that allows us to compete, but a tax code that rewards you for growing and creating jobs and paying your workers more. We have to bring regulations under control. And we can do that through what I call a regulatory budget. Set a hard cap on how much federal regulations can cost our economy and force these agencies to reduce regulations so they can reduce costs to American job creators. This is essential in the 21st century. We can start by repealing and replacing Obamacare. And immediately the question is, replace it with what? We replace it with a system that allows you to be in charge of your health care, not the government. That allows you to take your own pre-tax money or a tax credit or money your employer spending on your behalf and use it to buy health insurance, the kind you want, the kind you need, the kind you choose, from any company in any state in America that will sell it to you. We can start by modernizing our energy policies, fully utilizing the resources this country's been blessed with, particularly with oil and natural gas discoveries we've had over the last few years. And we can start by balancing our budget again, which we cannot do unless we save Social Security and Medicare. Now, I come from Florida. You may not know this, but there are a lot of people on Medicare and Social Security in Florida. My mother's one of them. I am not in favor of anything that's bad for my mother. That's why, and the good news is, we don't have to change anything for her, or for that matter, any American over 55 years of age. We can leave Social Security and Medicare exactly the way it is for them. But it will have to change for me. I'm 44. I feel 45. If I want there to be Social Security and Medicare when I retire, it's going to have to be different than my parents. And let me tell you what that means. That means I'm going to have to work 1 year longer than they did. It means that my benefits may not grow as fast as theirs, especially if I've had some financial success. It means that instead of a government-run program, I will have the option of taking my Medicare money and using it to buy a private plan that makes sense, kind of like what you see with Medicare Advantage today. These are not outrageous changes, and they're not too much to ask of my generation after what our parents and our grandparents have done for us. If we do these things, we will save these important programs, and we will balance our budget. And if we do all these things I just talked about, tax reform, regulatory reform, energy reform, healthcare reform, and entitlement reform, we are going to have an economic renaissance. And this country will create not just millions of jobs, millions of the best paying jobs that have ever existed. That's step one, but that's not enough. Step two is we have to make sure people have the skills for those new jobs. Because you know this as well as I do. The best jobs of the 21st century will all require some form of advanced education. And here's where we're getting it wrong. When people hear advanced education, what do they immediately think? 4 years of college. Well, that may make some sense for a lot of people. Meanwhile, we don't train people to be welders anymore. We don't train people to fix airplanes anymore. We don't train people to fix air conditioning units anymore. These are good-paying jobs. They're high in demand. They pay a lot more than a Greek philosopher or a political science major. And yet somehow we've told young Americans, if you go into that field, you're not that smart. And it isn't true. If you go into those fields, you'll actually have a job and the ability to buy a home and start a family and maybe own that business yourself. And so the first thing we must do is return vocational education to a priority in this country. Let's teach more 16 and 17 and 18-year-olds to work and be able to work right away. So when they graduate from high school, they are ready to join our economy and start their lives with productive work that pays good wages. We can do that. The second thing we need is alternatives to traditional college. This is especially important for people that have to work full-time and raise a family. So I always use examples. I'll give you an example. A young lady that worked for me when I was the Speaker of the Florida House, she was my assistant. She didn't make a lot of money. And that's because the state pay scale for my assistant was low. She was a single mother. She was raising her daughter by herself, and of course she lived with her mom to share costs. But she signed up for a program. And this program allowed her to go to school on nights, online and at night. And of course she had a flexible boss that wanted her to go back to school. And so I let her leave early some days and start earlier in the morning to get her work done, but also to get her schoolwork done. Well, a year before I finished the Speaker, she graduated. And instead of making $30,000 or $28,000 a year as my assistant, she started out making $62,000 a year or so, more or less. That's a dramatic change in her life. Today, that's impossible for many people because they have to work full-time and they have to find child care for their kids, which in 35 out of 50 states, child care is more expensive than going to college. So what is the alternative? Here's the alternative. Allow there to be alternatively accredited schools that give you degrees based on what you know, what you prove that you know, not how many hours you sit in a classroom, that allow you to package learning and bring it all together online, work experience, life experience, military experience for that matter, online courses, some of which are free from the finest institutions in the world. Package all of that learning into the equivalent of a degree And suddenly you will empower millions of Americans, especially millions of hardworking single mothers in this country, to get a better paying job and change their lives, the lives of their children, and ultimately the course of our country. Now, I'm not saying we're not going to have four-year education in this country. Of course, it'll continue to be an important cornerstone of higher education. But that needs to be reformed as well. First of all, we can't graduate people anymore with degrees that don't lead to jobs, but that they borrow thousands of dollars to pay for. Which is why I've sponsored a law that as president I will gladly push for and sign. It's called Right to Know Before You Go. It's bipartisan. And what it says is that before you take out a student loan, the school has to tell you how much people make when they graduate from that school with that degree. Because you deserve to know that the market for Roman philosophers is tightened significantly. You deserve to know that before you borrow $30,000 or $40,000, that the degree you're seeking doesn't lead to employment in the 21st century. For those who already have student loans, I believe you should pay back those loans based on how much you make. So the more you make, the faster you'll pay back those loans. The less you make, the less of a burden it will be. I also believe there should be alternatives to student loans, like the Student Investment Plan, which allows students, particularly graduate students, to go to an investment group, a private investment group that will pay their tuition as an investment in the individual. And in return, the individual pays them back a percentage of their income for a defined period of time. That's better than a loan, because all the risk is on the investment group. None of it is on the student. If it works out and you get a good paying job, the investors make their money back. If it doesn't work out, you don't owe anything. It won't be for everybody, but that's already been innovated in other parts of the world. And recently I was with Mitch Daniels, the former governor of Indiana, now the president of Purdue University. He wants to be the first school in America that uses that program. He believes it's that critical for our future. And I'm telling you that if we can do these two things, if we can revolutionize and modernize our economic policies, and we can give our people the skills they need for 21st century jobs, we're going to have an economic awakening in America of unequal proportion. We're going to have the greatest economic era you've ever seen. Why? Because there are hundreds of millions of people in the world that can now afford to buy what we make, that can afford to trade with us, that can afford to buy the agricultural products that we grow and process, that can afford to buy the innovations that we offer and the services we provide. There are now hundreds of millions of people in the world in the global middle class. We have more potential customers than ever. But we must have an economy that shapes the future and leads the way, that embraces the 21st century, not that fights against it. There is, of course, one more thing we have to do, and it is the most important role of the federal government. The federal government does a lot of things it's decided to do, but there is only one the federal government must do. It must keep us safe. And today we face at least 5 threats around the world, any one of which is alone could keep us up at night. In North Korea, a lunatic possesses multiple nuclear warheads and a long-range rockets capable of hitting the state of California. In China, you have a tyranny that is trying to take over the South China Sea, even the most important shipping lane in the world, by the way, even as they hack into our government computers, steal our company's secrets, and even gather information about individual Americans. In Europe, Vladimir Putin is trying to split Europe in half, and he's trying to destroy NATO by proving it no longer works. In the Middle East, radical jihadists can now be found in dozens of countries across multiple continents. And they even recruit people here in the United States online. And now, the latest, the president has signed a deal with the Ayatollah in Iran, which guarantees that they will possess a nuclear weapon and a long-range missile capable of reaching the United States before the next 10 years are out. This is a dangerous world. It requires American leadership as much as any time in my lifetime or yours for that matter. It doesn't mean America can solve all the world's problems. It does mean that when America doesn't lead, the vacuum it leaves behind leads to chaos. And today we're not leading. Today we have an administration that would rather be liked in the world than respected. An administration that believes that American engagement is the cause of global problems, not part of its solution. We know better. History teaches us better. We understand that we still have upon us the mantle of global leadership for the free people of the world. That we're still the only nation capable of bringing freedom-loving people from across this planet to take collective action against collective threats. It starts by having the strongest military in the world. Today we are slashing defense spending. Defense spending is not the reason why we have a debt, but it is the reason why we'll be unsafe. And today, as our potential adversaries grow their militaries, we're shrinking ours. Less soldiers, less sailors, less ships, and less airplanes. We're not investing in the missile defense technologies. We're not investing in the anti-Axis capabilities, or at least defeating them. And we're not investing in space warfare, even as China is testing systems to knock out our satellites. Because the fanciest equipment in the world won't work if the satellite system doesn't. Your GPS won't work if the satellite system doesn't. And as you can imagine, although I never like to stop and ask for directions, were it not for GPS, I'd get lost a lot, and so would you and everybody else these days. None of this works. That's why it's important we invest in those technologies and have the strongest military in the world. But the second thing we need is a foreign policy of clarity, of moral clarity. A foreign policy that our allies know they can rely on us, and our adversaries know they need to respect us. What kind of world do we live in when we treat the Ayatollah in Iran with more respect than the Prime Minister of Israel? You know, Israel is the only pro-American, free enterprise democracy in the Middle East. And yet you've got a White House that's basically saying Israel is now isolated. Israel is the pariah. And I'm just using that as one example, because it's one I feel deeply about, and I'm sure many of you do as well. But it has implications beyond Israel. You know, our allies around the world are watching this. And they know that Israel has strong support in America, in Congress, and in the population as a whole. And you know what they say to themselves? If America would do that to Israel, what would they do to us? If they're willing to turn their back on the only pro-American free enterprise democracy in the Middle East, what will they do to us? When I'm president, there will be no question in our allies' minds that we will do whatever it takes. And there will be no question in the eyes of the world that this nation will do whatever it takes to ensure that Israel survives and prospers as a Jewish state. These challenges are real. We shouldn't diminish them. They're significant. They have to be confronted. It's nothing new. We've been here before. Each generation of Americans has faced extraordinary challenges. They were different, but they faced them. If you grew up in the Great Depression, you faced great challenges. If you grew up during World War II, you faced great challenges. If you grew up in the aftermath of World War II, the 60s were a challenging time. The 70s were incredibly challenging. We survived disco music, for goodness sake. The 80s had their own challenges. Now it's time. Now the time has come for this generation to do its part. We face challenges, but we also face incredible opportunities. And if we embrace these opportunities, what's before us is what I call a new American century, the greatest era in our history. More peace, more prosperity, more people to buy and sell with than ever before, phones with great ringtones. That's all within our reach. All of that is within our reach. You know, think back to the Industrial Revolution. You don't think that was disruptive? Suddenly industries that had existed for centuries were gone. The horse-drawn carriage industry was not happy about the invention of the car. But America embraced it. They could have fought against it, but the Americans of the turn of that century embraced it. And today we look back at the Industrial Revolution as a time of extraordinary progress. The world was never the same again. And America emerged from that revolution in the economy as the strongest, most prosperous nation the world had ever known. It's time to do it again. That's the challenge before us. That's also the opportunity, and we should be excited about it. I thank God every day that I'm a 21st century American, because we will live together to see the greatest era in the history of this country. Because I believe that we cannot just save the American dream, we can expand it to reach more people and change more lives than ever before. I'll close by answering what I hope is the most important question any candidate would answer. And you live in Iowa, you're going to see a lot of presidential candidates. And when you meet them, and you will, because 1 out of 5 Republicans are now running for president. All right, I'm exaggerating, 1 out of 6, but a lot. When you meet them, you should ask them, why are you running? And some of them will tell you about what they've done in the past, and that's important. Some of them will tell you why they're going to win, and that's important. Some of them will tell you how angry they are. And we have a right to be angry about some of the things that are wrong in our government. But I'm going to tell you why I'm running. I'm running because I want this to still be a place where parents can do for their children what my parents did for me. And I say this because America doesn't owe me anything. I have a debt to America I will never fully repay. When my father was 9 years old, his mother died. He lived in Havana. They had this little business where they used to cater and provide food to the cigar factories in Cuba. So my grandmother, who I never met, would cook, and then my grandfather would deliver it. But then she died. Young woman, 40-something years old, she died. And my father, the business went out. He lost a cook. And from then on, he would have to work with his dad selling coffee in the streets of Havana. 9 years old. Stopped going to school, never went back, would work for the next 70 years of his life. So when he was a young man, he had big dreams. All young people have big dreams. But they became impossible. He didn't have an education, didn't have any connections, had to leave his country, came to America. He worked hard and persevered, but never made it big here either. So you know what the purpose of his life became? The purpose of my father's life, and my mother's for that matter, was to make sure that that never happened to us. That all the chances they never got, we would get. That all the doors that had closed for them would be open for me and for my siblings. And so that's why my parents worked long, hard hours. My father was a banquet bartender. He worked a lot of events like this. He stood in the back of a room behind a portable bar on nights, on weekends, on holidays, on days I know he didn't want to work. Worked well into his 70s. He stood behind a bar all those years. So one day I would have a chance to be here in front of you today running for the highest office in the land. And the journey from behind that bar to where I stand today, at least for me, that is the essence of the American dream. That's what makes us different. It's what makes us special. And that's not just my story, that's our story. For here in this country, we are all but a generation or two removed from someone who did that for us. What we are called to do now, and why I'm running for president, is I want that to still be possible. I want this to remain a place where people, through hard work, can not just achieve a better life and happiness, but give their kids a chance to be anything they want. If we do that, we can do it for more people than ever. We're on the verge of the greatest era in our history. We will leave our children as the freest and most prosperous Americans that have ever lived. And the 21st century will be a new American century. So that's why I chose to run for president. As much respect as I have for the other people running, and I do. I think we're very blessed as a party to have so many good candidates. The Democrats are struggling to find one. So we're blessed. But I honestly believe that no one running understands these challenges better than I do. The new world, the new economy, what families are going through. I said it in the debate, how is Hillary Clinton going to lecture me about student loans? I owed $100,000 up until 4 years ago, when I paid it off with the proceeds of my book, An American Son, now available on paperback. How's she going to lecture me about living paycheck to paycheck? I was raised paycheck to paycheck. For much of my 20s and 30s, we lived paycheck to paycheck. How is she going to lecture me about raising a family and how hard it is in the 21st century? Jeanette and I are raising 4 young children right now, who I was honored to have and happy that they were able to share in the experience here at the Iowa State Fair last night and this morning. If I'm the nominee, we will be the party of the future, and they will be the party of the past. We will be the party of tomorrow, and they will be the party of yesterday. We will be the party that's fighting for the people who are trying to make it. We will be the party of the bartender standing behind the portable bar and the maid cleaning the rooms. And they will be the party of big government and the people who have the money to influence it. And that's why I'm asking for you to caucus for me. I know it's early for a lot of you. Perhaps some of you have already made a decision. It's still time to change your mind. There's months ahead. Most of you are undecided. And I hope that in the weeks and months to come, I can earn your support. Because we can make a difference. And the only way we can make a difference is if this country's led by people that understand the future, the new era that we live in, and have real ideas about how to move us forward. And I believe only this party can do it. The sorts of ideas it will take to turn this country around will never come from the left. Their ideas are always the same one. For every problem, there's some sort of tax increase that's going to give them money to spend on a government program that will solve your problem. Well, the rest of the world has tried that for thousands of years. It doesn't work. There's one country that tried it differently. It was called the United States of America. For 200 and some odd years, it's been the most extraordinary land that man's never known. Now we are called to preserve it and expand it. And I hope that we do, for if we do, this new century, the 21st century, will go down in history as a new American century. Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you for Yeah, I was thinking I ate too much pie. Keep everything in here. Thank you. I ate too much yesterday. I need to
Your message was great, Rubio.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much.
You can do it.
I enjoyed being here.
I compete with that speech, so we got pie. Pie's next. We got the pie auction.
Thank you.
We got the pie auction coming up next. So for those that would like to have a little dessert with your steak dinner, we got pie. The person that's going to help auction that off is Auctioneer Keith. He's coming over here.
Where's Caesar at? He's working for like a lobbying firm now. Yeah, he's back to making money. How are you? Good to see you. You having fun over there? Yeah. Not too much. I come home on the weekends. That's good. Good to see you. Thanks, Tom. You got it.
See you. See you, Jack.
See you, David.
Also, one of the things that I've come to know in the last 6 months as chairman is how